Please take a good look at this face and remember it well. This is the Ryuji ni mo fukitonda ossan, or in English, the man who was outrageously blown away. It sounds better in Japanese, but it's still a bit of a mouthful. Despite appearing for a mere few seconds, he's become something of a symbol for the game I would like to talk about today, and a symbol of terrible games in general, spawning a lot of fan art and meme edits. It's an accurate representation, as this is the reaction of everyone who played today's subject matter. A golden crown of bad PS1 gaming. The one and only, Ancient Roman, Power of Darkside. This game has a reputation for being the worst RPG on the PS1, and it really lives up to that reputation, so to whet your appetite before we take it from the top, here's a quick preview of what you have to look forward to. Bad graphics below the standards of even the worst 3D of the time. Bizarre, confusing UI that obscures information that would be obvious in any other RPG. A plot full of deeply absurd, hasty developments like a DM trying and failing to make something plausible up on the spot. Music that is an assault on the senses. Bugs, broken balancing, and so much more. Ancient Roman is truly the most complete package of a bad game. No facet is left untainted. There is absolutely nothing redeemable here, and that is in itself its most redeeming quality. It's thoroughly awful, but also so awful that it's extremely entertaining. It gets the basics so fundamentally wrong in ways you probably never even thought possible. So, strap in and let me take you through this, the greatest masterpiece of the PlayStation 1. Ancient Roman is a turn-based JRPG that comes to us from Nihon Systems, a name that is very hard to Google, which is just as well because they have no real other noteworthy works to their name, and in fact Nihon Systems were just the publisher. The actual developer of the game is not known. It's hard to know if this credit stripping was out of malice or mercy in this case. This is the part of the video where I'd normally give some history on the game before I jump in, but there isn't a whole lot to tell. This game exists, it was put out by a publisher that made basically nothing else of note, it's for the PS1, it's not that deep, let's make fun of some absolutely incredible nonsense. What there is slightly more of is its history of notoriety on the Japanese side of the internet. For most of its life, Ancient Roman came and went without much fanfare, a game largely disregarded even by its own domestic market. But its popularity saw a huge surge on the Japanese internet around 2020 due to popular streamers and videos very much like this one, circulating the word about it and causing its reputation as a legendary kusoge to surge. Indeed, this caught my attention too, so I'm continuing this proud tradition into the English language. This wave of popularity also caused the price of the game on the aftermarket to explode, so nowadays prices are pretty absurd. So this also qualifies as one of the most expensive games on the PS1, at least at the time of speaking. For this video I'm using the English fan translation completed in 2024 by more or less the same team that created the translation for the Dreamcast 7 Mansions, a game I've previously covered on this channel. I promise we don't coordinate these videos or anything, we just have similar tastes in garbage. The first thing to address before we even hit new game is the title. This game is not in fact about ancient Rome or the Romans at all, it's using Roman in the sense of romantic, as in the Arthurian romances, an epic tale, a grand adventure, that sort of thing. This kind of usage is really common in Japanese and isn't particularly weird, it's just different to English. Just wanted to get that out of the way immediately before anyone wonders what this game has to do with Rome. The answer is nothing. No. Forget about that. There will be lots of weird turns of phrase to make fun of later, including one in this very title, but we'll get to those later. Let's start the game, shall we? Ancient Roman starts as it means to go on by beginning with an opening crawl. In a universe far from our own, a civilization once thought immortal was blown away in the blink of an eye. That senseless evil lurked in the shadows for untold years before unleashing its hate upon Heinrogue 17 years ago. Kai, the young tragic prince who lost everything, begins his journey to find peace, love, and even himself. Let us open the curtains to his tale. We're then treated to that cutscene I opened the video with of the world exploding and the old man being outrageously blown away, etc, etc. Then 1,000 years pass and we're suddenly shown a new scene of a blue-haired woman cradling a baby. Monsters break into the room, making the doors cartoonishly bulge off the hinges in the process, kidnapping the baby. Another 17 years pass, so we're hit with 2 time skips in literally 3 minutes of real time, and the camera zooms in on some sort of settlement. We are then presented with a naming screen before anyone has spoken. This is Kai, who despite being explicitly named in the intro cutscene, is allowed to have his name changed by you at this juncture. Being able to name the protagonist despite them obviously having a canon name wasn't rare in JRPGs of the time, and the trend persisted for a bizarrely long time in my opinion, but I can't think of any that do this directly after naming them in the intro anyway. I named him Kyle, but spelled weird. You'll see why I think this is fitting soon. Our misnamed Kyle is awoken from his slumber by the surprisingly plainly named Jonathan, saying that Kai was crying for his mother in his sleep, indicating the previous cutscene was a dream vision. It's not clear if it's just the baby kidnapping scene or if the man being exploded scene was also part of this vision. Kai is in such disbelief that he could be caught doing something so obviously uncool that he teleports out of bed and denies knowing what his mother even looked like. The two are then called outside and we get more of a sense for the situation. Kai lives in a small camp with other people kidnapped by monsters, forced to dig holes for them in pursuit of currently unclear ends. From here, we actually get control. We are a primitive 3D model who can move in exactly 8 directions, no more no less, against the pre-rendered backgrounds in that very Final Fantasy VII kind of way, albeit the quality of the pre-renders here is noticeably pretty rough. I pop open the stats menu real quick and notice that Ancient Roman is the kind of game that refuses to use familiar names for anything and assigns inscrutable acronyms to everything. I'll save the mechanical explanations for later, but you're gonna need the manual to divine what most of these even stand for, let alone what they do. I also note at this stage this is a game where you can save anywhere from the menu, no save point required. But you also only get one save file and no more. Yes, this game has missable events because of course it does. It is a PS1 RPG, so if you're the kind of person who loses sleep over missing stuff, then this game hates you personally because it will not let you rotate saves. We talk to the other prisoners and we find out that they suspect they're going to be killed soon and that one of them dug up some kind of glowing black gem. The black materia, it's happening! Yes, Final Fantasy VII came out before this game did, and you can definitely tell. Do bear that fact in mind as we go on. After we speak to everyone, a bird suddenly manifests in the field. People do not enter naturally in Ancient Roman so much as they simply pop into existence as is convenient, and tells everyone to go home and there will be no work tomorrow. We're given a bit of time to poke around the environment, collect some items like this heck of fruit, and stumble onto navigational problem number 1 and something that will be a constant over the game. Some of the doors in the environment can be entered and lead to new rooms. Others cannot. Can you tell which is which? No, you can't. The only way to know is to rub your face against everything and see which ones function, because unlike in Final Fantasy VII, there is no button you can press that will highlight exits and entrances. FF7 itself caught some amount of flack back in the day for being occasionally unclear about where you could move into. Ancient Roman is, no exaggeration, 10 quintillion times worse about this, owing to how much rougher the background pre-renders are in the first place. In one of the houses we find a knife, which I equip, and an iron axe, but the game pranks you and tells you it's too rusty to use. But if you examine it again, Kai makes the decision to snap the head off the axe and just use the handle as a baton instead, getting you a second weapon. This is missable, and also an early warning sign that sometimes the game is going to do that thing where you need to interact with stuff twice in order to make progress. A hallmark of any unintuitive retro game. Also, when items are collected out of the background like this, no change is represented visually. The axe stays in the background completely unaltered, even after being picked up. A very haphazard way of implementing pickups into your pre-rendered backgrounds. Incidentally, yes, this is absolutely the kind of game where you're going to wander into every single wall mashing X just in case there's something to pick up, and you will occasionally be correct for doing this, because items do not cleanly separate from the background, so it's often unclear what's an item and what's set dressing. We're off to a great start, and I haven't even made it to combat yet, so let's layer on another frustration. This is really hard to explain with words, but it's just hard to even walk around these maps because they've made the completely insane direction to have the directions on the D-pad move you differently depending on what room you're in. In more isometric rooms like this, the controls invert from what you'd expect, where the D-pad directions move you on diagonals and the diagonal directions move you on the cardinal directions. It's really disorienting. Sometimes it's normal, it mostly behaves itself in outdoor environments, but every so often it's gonna hit you with this mix-up and you'll suddenly have a hard time moving correctly. It's like becoming suddenly drunk. This game is so fundamentally messed up that the basic act of moving is fraught with friction. Truly the complete package. Anyway, we catch wind of a rumor from an unnamed girl in one of the shacks about a secret passageway hidden in the sleeping quarters. I wonder which part of the background I have to interact with. Because yes, for some reason, while collectible items are hard-baked into the pre-renders, things like this aren't and thus stand out like a sore thumb. This isn't bad in of itself, but it's the lack of consistency that's confounding here. Kai then finds the secret passage and the game does something really bizarre by showing you this nondescript yellow polygon. This is a treasure chest you can open, but for some reason, this one, the first one in the game you can open, contains nothing. Meanwhile, this nondescript part of the background houses a healing item. Why do they do this? What kind of a way to introduce a mechanic is this? Am I being pranked? Kai emerges on the other side just in time to eavesdrop on the warden of the camp talking about how the black gem that was dug up is the core of Darkside they've been looking for. Oh, it really is black materia. They intend to use it to summon some kind of demon lord, general nefarious evildoer type stuff. The two villains arrive at the conclusion they no longer need the camp and so plan on slaughtering all of the people imprisoned. Kyle runs back, tells everyone in this case meaning 4 people, to which old man Jonathan randomly launches into the spiel about how heroes had a special spirit power and he can feel this spirit power in Kai. I'm not out here to make fun of the JRPG for being too heavy on the JRPG tropes, Chosen One and all that, but he really brings this up completely unprompted for seemingly no reason. Even going as far as to say that Kai will definitely play a vital role in this country's future. Like, lay it on thicker, old man, why don't you? I get it, Kai is the protagonist. There is no logical reason Jonathan believes this, and he also broadcasts clear as day that he is old and not long for this world, which of course means he is completely correct. Saying something stupid and then dying will make it true, it's a law of fiction. Having ticked absolutely every box on the requisite JRPG starter plot pack, the group prepares to rebel against their captors and we're introduced to the characters who will become our party members. Big Man Burke and the previously unnamed girl is christened the slightly awkward Michelia, granting her access to the main party by dint of gaining a first name. Notably, everyone in the party is a bit hesitant to take her along because they think it'll be too dangerous for her and are honestly kinda mean to her about it. Put a pin in that, this is the start of a trend with this character. Thus, the prison riot begins. Everyone's playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots with the monsters. I equip my party as best I can and enter combat. Behold. Art. Just art. Absolute cinema. I mean, really. I have no idea what to say about this that isn't already obvious. I do remind you at this point that this game was released a year after Final Fantasy VII. This game came out the same year as Xenogears. It is absolutely no wonder this game was largely forgotten in its own time when the game is this hideous. And oh yeah, the music, have another taste of that. One of the last bastions of otherwise terrible games is usually the refrain, "Oh, but at least the music is really good." And Ancient Roman's music certainly is noteworthy, just not for the right reasons. We'll delve more into the actual nuances of the combat later, as right now we largely have no meaningful options other than attack. Not incredibly uncommon for JRPGs in general, mind you. What you will notice is the weirdly terrible combat pacing common to bad JRPGs of the era, where everything just takes a bit too long to resolve and there's a lot of weird pausing going on when blows land. Even the good JRPGs of the era had some heinously slow battling, so this flaw isn't necessarily unique to Ancient Roman, but it doesn't break the mold here. What is unique to Ancient Roman is this absolutely ridiculous Team Rocket is blasting off death animation that occurs when you or an enemy is defeated in battle. Everything in the whole game does this, just whoosh. It's a very surreal effect, and I presume exists simply because creating death animations would have taken time and effort. We eventually do battle with the Warden, serving as our first boss. Again, we just attack because there is no strategy to deploy at the moment. The boss is outrageously blown away, and we emerge the victor. You get that nice little Barbie game-ass sound effect every time you level up, and what's more, if multiple party members level up in quick succession, the sound effect will start to awkwardly cut into itself, because Ancient Roman is the kind of game that can't even do a level up jingle gracefully. "Rip in peace," Burke aptly remarks at the fallen foe. Let's talk about this line real quick, because this might strike you as strange, but there's actually a lot we can learn about the game, about Japanese, and about translation from it. Normally nitpicking single lines in isolation like this is a flawed way to analyze translations, but bear with me, I'm going somewhere with this. The original Japanese line here is "gorinju, dana." Gorinju meaning deathbed, one's dying hour, that kind of thing. Dana is both a shortening and more casual form of desu ne, which is difficult to translate one-to-one with an English phrase, but it's a sentence-ending expression of confirmation. Essentially the whole thing is, if put super dryly, saying, they're dead, yeah? So why this kind of a quirky line for the translation? Here's the rub. This is a typo, but it's a unique kind of Japanese typo where they haven't used the correct kanji for the word, instead likely by mistake using only one of the two kanji this word is normally written with. This makes the line read strangely to a Japanese audience because the half-hearted divisions between kanji and kana within the same word like this feel sloppy. It was more readily forgiven in the NES and Super NES days, where more restrictive usage of kanji in service to limited memory capacity was more commonplace, but by the PlayStation 1, people expected better. Ancient Roman is full of this kind of sloppy writing, but it's also peculiarly full of the reverse, where words with comparatively uncommon kanji are written using their kanji versions, like shrine, which is written with this not super common character, which is an odd thing to do. Essentially, words you would expect to have kanji don't, and words you might expect to be written without them are. The resulting mix creates a game that a lot of Japanese players complain is annoying to read, because it chafes against conventions of the written language for seemingly no good reason. As a non-native speaker, I am inclined to agree. It is annoying to read. It is poorly written in a technical sense, even in its native Japanese. So what does that mean for our English line? The question becomes, how do you maintain the texture of a script that's poorly written when translating? You could clean it up, and indeed the English patch actually has in many places. There's a pretty compelling argument to be made that the English script is much cleaner than its original counterpart. But famous lines like this have instead been translated by way of playing into the goofiness of the line, which I think is a sound choice. It's certainly artistically defensible. What you cannot do is translate the mistake literally and also make a typo in your fan translation, because then you're just going to get bug reports. Which is an interesting conundrum to run up against, and a problem that is relatively unique to translations of games that are poorly written at the source. This poor writing at the source level extends even to the title. See, I told you it'd come up again. As even something as simple as the word ancient is spelled wrong in the Japanese transcription here. They couldn't even get the title right, that's the level we're dealing with here. Language digressions aside, we get an FMV cutscene showing Jonathan, the old man, kicking the bucket. Who could have predicted this? The FMVs are also low quality, and sometimes I swear they randomly change speed to stretch themselves out to fit the line reads. Because yeah, we also got voice acting. I am surprised they were able to find the budget for voice actors, given the cutscenes they're in look like this. We'll have more scenes to prod later, this one's pretty short. After, well, not really burying the old man, I think they need to be under the ground for that to count, not whatever the hell's going on here. There's kind of a funny pause where our three leads, newly christened JRPG party that they are, all look at each other and go, what now? Since the game didn't really establish any other threads for them to pull at, in this moment the game almost reaches self-awareness. Almost. Kai kind of awkwardly suggests heading to a nearby town. No real reason, but it's there and they don't want to stay here. In the absence of anything better to do, everyone agrees. Now we're in a classic JRPG staple moment, traversing a forest where we can now fight classic enemies like the Hook Bee. One thing you will very likely notice at this point is that the encounter rate is, in the tradition of bad JRPGs, quite high. Something I want to point out is that when anyone in your party gets a critical hit, they say a little line before attacking. The English patch went to the hassle of adding mid-game subtitles for these, which don't exist in the Japanese version, and is a really cool addition. Burke's crit line is often misheard by Japanese players due to the muffled delivery as meaning, I'm gonna fart. We cross the forest and arrive at a checkpoint, surprisingly sensibly set up to guard a nearby town from the monsters. This throws me because it's just about one of the only logical structures in this game. Albeit the station is unmanned, and the party soon discovers the corpse of a soldier, who they steal a locket off under the guise of notifying his next of kin. That's a bit glib, but the tone of the conversation doesn't really imply that they're especially serious about this task. As an aside, please listen to this absolutely chaotic nightmare that plays while you're exploring this area. I didn't kick the CD player or edit this, there's just a bug with this song where the loop gets stuck every second pass and it endlessly repeats this note. It will eventually correct itself if left to loop another full time, but still, wow. The music is already the auditory manifestation of a panic attack, and it has to now throw in cardiac arrest on top of that? Burke then smashes down a door and we exit. This entire area is only 3 screens, which is maybe okay for an introductory area. Surely later areas will grow in size and become more complex and interesting as the game goes on. And we're dumped into the world map. This game has you select locations from a pretty crude-looking menu superimposed on a pre-render rather than having a true overworld like the Final Fantasy VII it's clearly aspiring to be, or something of the ilk. Because this game had 3 pennies and a ham sandwich worth of budget, so no chance of something that fancy. Moving to the only location currently available, we enter the town and find it also completely devoid of life. The group decides to take a rest in the only available bedroom that conveniently has exactly 3 weirdly giant beds. Like, what is going on with the perspective here? What kind of room has exactly 3 equidistant single beds? But they are intruded on by this thing who introduces himself as Boo-Ray and explains in all caps that he used to be a human until one day he wasn't, along with all the townsfolk disappearing. At this juncture, Burke chips in like a player trying to help the DM remember his own plot that he heard about a people becoming monsters disease, which as a term is just as clunky in Japanese as it is in English, I assure you. Boo-Ray informs the group of a wizard researching the disease and to seek them out. Having gracefully given the game a plot thread to follow, Boo-Ray promptly blinks out of existence. So we head north to Lake Mount to seek a wizard. Very classic RPG looking town with the water fountain in the square and everything, cozy stuff. I notice at this point in the inn that some NPCs are just baked into the pre-rendered background, so they stare unblinking into the distance, eternally frozen in time. Creepy. One such NPC is the proprietor of an equipment shop where the items are sold are weirdly modern and banal at that for the medieval fantasy setting, with sneakers being available for purchase. For way more than I currently have. We haven't really had the time to fight monsters and accrue a lot of cash yet. If you have the classic RPG instinct to grind out cash to kit everyone out with new gear at every new town you come across, this game will throw you for a loop because there isn't really a good opportunity to do that, and spoilers, there won't be for a while. The shop menu has a bunch of other quirks to it as well. As you can see, the only information the game displays about an item is which character can use it, not what it actually does or what its stats are. You can generally feel your way around equipment with the principle of higher price equals better item, but consumable items are far more mysterious. In ancient Roman, fruit and milk recovers your mana, but an egg is a permanent stat increasing item, and there is absolutely no way to know this from the purchase alone. Given again, money is pretty scarce at this point in the game, you're not going to be inclined to just muck around and see what happens, so at least for me, I just barely interacted with consumables. But you might be tempted to, since as you go about browsing you will occasionally be pestered by one of your current party to buy whatever it is you have selected. This is done with no regard for current money, whether or not the item would be particularly useful, nothing, it's completely random. Worse still, if you then decline to purchase anything, you will be verbally abused in retaliation. Mate, I can't afford shit in this economy, I don't see you managing the adventuring budget. Your only reward for purchasing a requested item is another voice line. I think this is intended to add flavor, but the lack of sanity checking on what they ask for instead makes it come off as even more unstable. Like characters telling you they'll take good care of a bread roll? Just eat it, dude. It's bread. It's bread. Something you may also notice at this moment is the slight hitch that takes place when this shop browsing voice line plays. Let's talk about that. I glossed over it earlier, but we've now seen this behavior in 3 entirely distinct places, and it's actually a sign of something seriously wrong with this game under the hood. In shop menus, slightly before attacking in battle, and on level up, every time the game tries to play a sound effect, any sound effect, there's a very noticeable hitch before it plays. Every single time without fail. It seems to happen everywhere this game takes on the Herculean task of playing a single sound effect, so you may also begin to notice that the rest of the game entirely lacks them. Menu interactions, cutscenes, all of these things lack sound effects that might be present in a game not being held together with spit and gum. In fact, many cutscenes will crudely insert sound effects in text into the dialogue box in lieu of actually playing any, presumably because doing so would cause the cutscene to awkwardly hitch. But why? Sound effects were not some mystic art unknown to the puny specs of the PlayStation 1. How did this get so bungled? If you thought Unreal Engine shader stutter was bad, try this piece of golden programming on for size. According to the translator on the project, Snowy Aria, this is because all sound effects in the game have been normalized to 10 seconds in length regardless of how long the sound effect is, even though the longest effect is maybe 2 seconds of talking. In other words, every single sound effect has anywhere from 8 seconds to 9.5 seconds of empty space inserted into it. But why is this a problem? Well, try to remember the PlayStation 1 is a delicate and tiny device whose sound processor has a whopping 512 kilobytes of God's own RAM to work with, so it does not much like it when some dumbass asks it to immediately stuff 10 full seconds of audio in there, play it, and then delete it immediately, forcing this stutter to repeat every time it has to play a sound effect. Every time. Incidentally, Snowy Aria helpfully provided me with the sound effects from the files, not specifically for this video, but because I thought they were funny, but nevertheless, very nice of her to do that for me, thank you very much. As for why they made every single sound effect 10 seconds long, and also I noticed made all of them exactly 370 kilobytes in file size, I have genuinely absolutely no clue. I can only assume this is some sort of extremely bizarre workaround for some other problem they must have experienced when developing the game, but I couldn't even begin to guess at what that might have been. This game is such a gnarled mess that speculation isn't even possible. I'll just say it's because 370 is the programmer's lucky number, because that makes as much sense as any other guess I could come up with. Anyway, our group is told to do some errand boy stuff. First, we gotta hand the locket we callously looted to the family of the deceased before we report to the castle to share news of everyone being dead at that military checkpoint. So first we gotta pass through a village. This is Sanitas Village, where this absolute gem of a song will lull you into a new universe. No, please. I insist. Take a listen. This has gone on to become one of the game's most famous songs because, of course, it's just so unhinged. It's destabilizing in a way I've never really heard before, even out of bad video game music. Of the bad games I've covered on this channel, many of them have managed to have at least passable, sometimes even good music. But Ancient Roman is such a thorough top-to-bottom disaster error that it can't even take refuge in this aspect. But there's actually more going on here, so let's finally talk about it. As is hopefully obvious, Ancient Roman's music is an atonal off-key assault on the senses, the kind of bad that makes you wonder how you'd even create something like this even by accident. Many a good video game song is let down by poor choice of samples, but this is beyond even that type of musical mediocrity. However, if you are undeterred by this, a soundtrack CD was nevertheless made available. Curiously, the soundtrack CD seems to have been released before the game did by about a month, which is kind of weird by itself. At any rate, listening to the soundtrack CD reveals something pretty peculiar. Take a listen to the game version of the boss theme real quick. We haven't actually gotten to anything that uses it yet, but it's fine. And here's the soundtrack version. Much improved, I think you'll agree. Still a bit generic, I think it's got kind of default RPG Maker music kind of vibes personally, but it's definitely no longer the form of Sonic Warfare that the game version is. So what the hell happened? It isn't known exactly for sure, but the generally agreed upon theory is some sort of error when actually implementing the music into the game caused various parts of the songs to be played in the wrong key, creating the dissonant cacophony present in the actual game. In other cases, things that were previously inaudible or pushed into the background become clearer on the CD version, leaving some songs without their main melody in the actual game. It's a real smorgasbord of musical cock-ups that robbed the game of, well, not a great soundtrack, but at least a competent one. Many of the songs are still kind of compositionally odd, even in their fixed versions, but are dramatically more listenable than anything present in the final release. I can't say what would have caused this to happen, it seems to have been an error with implementing the MIDI sequencing, although how it went unnoticed is another question. At any rate, it leaves Ancient Roman with the high honour of having one of the worst soundtracks to secrete out onto the PS1. Such is Ancient Roman's truly fascinating commitment to doing its absolute worst in all possible ways you can conceivably assess a game. Meanwhile, in a local hot spring, I find some long johns. I would like to point out there's nothing preventing you from wearing multiple copies of the same accessory, so if you want to kit out your dude in 3 pairs of pants, there is nothing stopping you from living the stream. It's not even a bad idea if you can afford it. It turns out the long johns provide a decent boost to defense. You won't be able to afford it though, since while this town finally has an opportunity to earn money in that a couple of screens have enemy spawns on them, and by enemies I mean you can pick fights with birds and mosquitoes? This is how the game chooses to render the concept of a mosquito. Alright, whatever. The amount of money you earn is pitifully low compared to the price of anything worth buying at the moment. If you take this opportunity to kill a bunch of stuff and earn money thinking that you might be behind the curve later, you'll actually become super overpowered and throw the curve in the other direction. Because Ancient Roman, for all its many faults, is not actually a very hard or grindy game. It doesn't take many fights to level up, and individual level ups grant such a dramatic increase in power that 1 or 2 extra levels above what the game expects you to be turns you into an unstoppable killing machine. Unfortunately, I do in fact spend time getting money because of exactly the thought process I described above, so I'm gonna be overpowered for a bit. I also realize at this point I'd quite like to know what these stats actually mean, so I check the manual and here's the short version. Attack power, defense power, agility, magic defense, magic attack, but the last 2 the manual explains as being short for strength and skill, and then mysteriously neglects to actually explain any further than that. Need a bit more to go on there, pal. I wasn't asking for what they stood for, they could be called Glorp and Fudge for all I care. I just need to know what they actually do, and that's the one thing you haven't told me. Anyway, remember that wizard researching the people becoming monsters disease? Because that's the thread we're currently picking up on. The game's thrown a few balls up in the air and it will follow up on them in whatever order it finds convenient in that moment. We find him resting up after getting his ass beat by bandits, and he is unhelpful and cantankerous, which prompts Burke to call him a shitty old man, an outburst I enjoy very much. But he does tell us a few things. 1, the disease feels more like an external power than a real disease. 2, he gives us a bunch of elemental magic for free. It is actually possible to buy these spells earlier, so again, if you spent time grinding that out, congratulations, you wasted your time. 3, we should go to Heinrogue Castle. And 4, we shouldn't bring Michelia with us with the inexplicably mean reasoning that she's just bad and incompetent in a fight and isn't worth bringing with us. This is the second instance of the game's mean-spirited attitude towards Michelia, and this whole thing both is and isn't going in the direction you think it is. Kai also reveals his last name is Orpheus. The game puts this on a single line like it's inherently meaningful, but it isn't, but it is rather adorable. Look at you pilfering from Greek myth at random, it thinks it's a real JRPG. Cute. I suffer difficulties attempting to leave the building because Ancient Roman is often really finicky about map exit zones. You seriously cannot take a single thing for granted with this game. Random aside before we leave town, this chest contains a pretty decent shield, but this is actually a trick because this chest, and this chest alone, is one of those classic bullshit RPG staples where the item inside changes the longer you ignore it, and by the end of the game it contains completely unique, strong equipment. I didn't know about this, so I immediately lost out by opening what I think by this point is maybe the 3rd chest we've seen in the entire game. Thanks, Ancient Roman. We move on to Mel, which prompts Kai to remind us that we're looking for the Pendant family first because this game is spinning too many plates and it has to just tell you what lead to pursue. This is goofy, but it's also interesting that it's polite and self-aware enough about its plot already being a bit of a mess to nudge you this way, because I could see a worse game expecting you to divine which plot thread to follow yourself. Albeit the game goes overkill here by telling me to look for the inn. There's only one building on the screen, but I'm just not quite sure myself, so I talk to the NPCs, and all of them tell me, this building's the inn. What to do, what to do. On some level I get it, because like, could you tell this is an inn from looking at it? But also, what creative process led to that level of signposting being necessary? Especially because on the next screen over, there are in fact 3 stores, 2 item stores, and 1 accessory store, and absolutely zero way to tell that from the outside. I don't know, maybe put up a sign or something is all I'm saying. There are more efficient ways of going about this. Oh wait, they actually did try to use signs here? They look like they've been through the wash a few times, but okay, so they do try to use signs, but only sometimes. Sadly, I continue to have no game, so I cannot buy anything. A harrowing reflection of real life for the kinds of people who make hour-long videos about PlayStation 1 JRPGs. A shame, as I would love to buy this elf stick, a weapon that apparently cannot be wielded by anyone in the current party, so I'm looking forward to what this game thinks an elf ought to look like. At the magic shop, the shopkeeper helpfully explains what exactly one of the spells he sells does. But only one. You don't get an explanation of any of the others, which is a bit grim since much like the items, the game doesn't deign to display this info anywhere in-game. A Volvo apparently costs $1,200 in this world. This is actually a defensive buffing spell, and a very potent one at that. Not that there's any way to really know this information, since all defensive magic in this game just has some vague visual effect display and no text or even icon to clarify functionality. I'd say you need to buy the guide, but as far as I know, Ancient Roman never even had one published because I'd have bought it for this video if there was one. As for why the spells have names like Porsche and Volvo, absolutely no clue. I can only assume the creators just thought they sounded cool. If I may address magic in slightly more detail, you may be shocked to learn that there are many problems with the system. Firstly, when a spell is acquired, any character can use it as long as they have the MP to cast it. Not inherently bad in of itself, but when a character lacks the MP to use a spell, it doesn't display grayed out in the menu or something intuitive, it just disappears from the menu entirely. In the not even particularly unlikely scenario that you acquire a spell whose cost exceeds your entire party's max MP at that point, it'll just not show up anywhere and you'll get confused. The reason this isn't unlikely is that attacking magic has a very poor efficiency MP-wise, with spells costing a significant chunk of a character's MP for not especially impressive returns, with mid and high level spells having costs that outstrip the vast majority of the cast's MP growths. I used magic so little that I can barely even find any footage of me using it to demonstrate this point because you'll very quickly realize it's just much simpler to attack physically and ignore it entirely. The cheaper healing and support spells are conversely quite useful, but that magic can be used by every character, meaning there is no real need to have a dedicated mage. Support spells are equally good no matter who uses them, so it's not looking too great for Michelia's chances of staying in the active party long term, you know? On that note, shortly after we drop off the pendant with this now widowed NPC who takes it weirdly in stride, we check in with the village elder and get a lead on where Michelia's parents are, the story having now taken a bit of an odd shift in priority towards locating her family, such that we can safely drop her off and get back to adventuring. Michelia, for her part, objects to this immediately, clearly stating that she would prefer to travel with Kai instead. Kai is unsupportive in this moment and rationalizes it as the journey becoming too dangerous, although it's not entirely clear why he thinks it's too dangerous for her but not for him. They're about the same age. And Kai has no real special qualification to be doing this either. Nevertheless, we pay Michelia's relatives a visit as they're 2 screens over, and kind of awkwardly attempt to dump her onto them, to which the nameless NPCs aren't exactly thrilled either. Burke ends up being the sensible one in the ensuing exchange as he questions why Kai would even want to ditch Michelia and asks the salient question, what about how Michelia feels? A valiant attempt from Burke to center Michelia's agency, which has up to this point been completely ignored. It ends up not really mattering as the NPC they attempted to ditch her with just declines to keep her, saying they can't afford to feed another mouth, and Michelia's back like she never left. This mini-arc is over now and will not come up again for the rest of the game. Kai still gets one last questioning of Michelia's suitability to travel with them, again continuing to not satisfactorily address why it's dangerous for Michelia but not him. You know, besides the obvious point that Michelia's a woman. Oh god, gender alert. I have acknowledged gender, the comments will never forgive me for this. Really though, how else are you supposed to read this? They don't directly acknowledge it and instead try to play it off as Kai being concerned for her safety, but still, come on. Furthermore, this ends up being a fascinating example of the unique property of video games to reinforce their narrative through gameplay going wrong. Because, mechanically speaking, Kai is completely correct. Michelia is awful. I think the intent of this narrative beat is that the mechanics would show Michelia is a capable mage and thus earns her place in the party. I'm going to ignore the fact the narrative feels the need to make her earn that place, while Kai's right to party goes completely unquestioned or the gender alarm is going to go goddammit. Because as previously touched on, magic is ass in this game, and Michelia is in fact the worst character by a considerable margin. So the narrative is telling you that Michelia sucks, and the mechanics are, in turn, also telling you that Michelia sucks. Remember that Michelia is still a main character. I don't actually think we're supposed to feel that negatively about her, but you probably will, because despite the typical flow of this type of game, Michelia can't actually do anything to impress the player. Neither the story nor the laws of the universe she's in will cut her a break. I just end up feeling bad for her. I've never seen a character in a video game treated so poorly in a way that feels like a perfect blend of accidental and purposeful. It makes me miss the power couple from Mark of the Mermaid so bad. Sorry, Michelia, you deserved a better game. You're still getting benched at the first opportunity though, cause you fucking suck. The game then, almost sheepishly, attempts to move on from this terrible interlude, with Burke and Michelia announcing they've forgotten what they were doing. The game will do this more than a few times, and I sort of appreciate this as a means of player guidance, but it's also only necessary because the plot is such a jumbled mess that these reminders are necessary. It feels like the world's worst D&D group. The DM's making it up as he goes, and the players aren't paying attention and have to keep asking what's going on. We're off to Castle Heinrogue, but the group gets lost in the woods on the way out of town because they are the dumbest RPG party ever when this floats in. Real good faces going on in this game. Every frame is a painting. And just like that, we have a new party member, the Pixie, Farah. I would criticize the completely arbitrary nature of this, but at least she's excited to be here. Farah can't equip most anything besides special equipment because she is a pixie and thus tiny, including a very funny special exception for the long johns even though most accessories do still work. The johns are simply too long for her. I actually don't immediately bench Michelia for her because I incorrectly assumed that she would be weak due to this lack of equipment. I eventually realized the error of my ways as the reason Farah has no equipment is that she doesn't need any to be a powerhouse, she's simply naturally gifted in the art of stabbing. Exploring the castle town, I received the wisdom that eating a tough man will make you tougher, thus marking the game's bold endorsement of cannibalism as the primary means of progress. No, it's short for manju, as in steamed buns. They're permanent stat upgrading items, nothing fancy, but I absolutely love the sentence, "A nut man will protect you against magic." It's like the weirdest way to explain the definition of post-nut clarity. Another town, another array of stores full of things I can't afford, because I'll note at this point that for the past hour and a half there's been no opportunity to get into any fights. The pacing becomes very story-centric at this juncture. It does eventually pick up, but it's really odd the game shows you like 4 full towns worth of stores full of things you definitely can't afford during this time period. I mope about my lack of funds with the local chickens, which prompts Michelia to learn a very expensive spell from them. It's very much that kind of game. There's all kinds of crap hidden this way. I only found this by accident, since it only happens if you, for some reason, talk to this chicken 3 times. Chicken magic in hand, we attempt to ask nicely pretty please if we can go into the castle. We're obviously told no because what business do we have? So we choose to infiltrate the castle by attempting to get a job as castle guards for which they are conveniently recruiting. Kai, being the unmotivated bum that he is, simply says, I don't have any better ideas. The recruitment process takes the form of a fighting tournament, but rather insanely the fights are represented like this. If only I were playing a kind of game that had a whole system of abstracting away the space in which combat takes place so I could actually play this kind of fight. If only such a game existed. Oh, I know.
Versus thief.
腕が鳴るぜ
Battle. Fight.
Alas, we cannot have such nice things. Next match, Kai fights and loses so hard he misplaces his jewelry. Burke then fights the same guy, and the presentation here somehow gets even lazier, and Burke doesn't even move before it immediately rolls into the next text box saying he's also lost. So we're out of the tournament, but we're summoned before the minister anyway due to Kai's sensational bling getting noticed in the commotion. No, Kai, walk straight! Minister Man concludes from Kai's locket that he is in fact this kingdom's prince who was stolen away as a baby, if you recall the opening cutscene. Everyone, not unreasonably, assumes Kai will take up his new position as royalty, but that would make for a really boring game, so Kai awkwardly contrives a reason to keep the game going, openly admitting, at first we didn't really have a goal for our journey. I've never seen a game so frequently admit it's being made up as it goes. That reason being seeking a solution to the people becoming monsters disease, remember that? The castle sage doesn't know anything, but he tells us to seek the Grand Sage, a much cooler sage than he is, for help. So we're off to the Sage's Road, and this is the first time for about a full 2 hours, give or take, that we've encountered anything that could be considered a dungeon. Enemies are back. We've got a new and predictably awful battle song. Oh yeah. Dungeon crawling! What do you mean it's over? Huh? The Sage's Road is about 3 screens and I got into exactly 1 fight. Never mind, false alarm, we are not back. Sage's Tower consists of a bunch of identical rooms recolored, but surprisingly no fights. I know I might seem very combat hungry right now, but I'm also just surprised that the game doesn't attempt to pad its runtime by making you fight through a bunch of very samey rooms. That seems like it'd be on brand for this kind of crappy RPG, but it's just not the wavelength Ancient Roman operates on. The environments are rather surprisingly compact. Kinda thought I'd be going on some sort of grand quest here to scale the Sage's Tower! But actually it took like 5 minutes to run over here. The Grand Sage somewhat arbitrarily decides we are to train our minds and bodies instead of actually saying anything useful about the disease or whatever it is we're doing. I think the game forgot again. So we're off to the Island of Trials via the ominously named Port of No Return, which is a little on the nose since we can't get off the island until we're done. But it's not actually a huge deal since the island itself has free healing and shops, you can't really get stuck here. Now this is more what I expected from the Sage's Tower. We're just here to brawl our way to the top of a tower so we get to spend a fair bit of time here with the goofy enemies. Look at this Grim Reaper. Adorable. I love him. It's around this point I finally clock that Farah is a murder machine, so Michelia out, literal manic pixie girl in. Just to digress for a moment, for as ugly as the battle screens are and continue to be, at least they don't look as bad as they did in the demo. Yes, Ancient Roman had a demo representing the game at an even earlier stage of development, an even more hideous battle... that's not that bad. The 2D art cut-ins are nice, even. Still a bit visibly budget, but they're probably the nicest looking single asset in the entire production, and they're nowhere to be seen in Final. It still doesn't exactly look good, but there's a pretty good argument to be made that the presentation actually got worse between demo and final release. What the hell happened here? I'd love to explain this with some sort of story like I was able to with the music, but there are some things in this world we just don't know, and I have no idea why this change was made. But we do have this demo. There's a number of interesting but ultimately not very consequential differences between the demo and final, and I hemmed and hawed about whether to include it in this video at all, so I decided to split the difference and upload the incredibly nerdy exploration of the demo content and its differences as a Patreon exclusive video. So if you're interested in that, please consider checking it out and supporting the channel in the process. Let's get back to the meat of things. Top of the tower reach, I gained a few levels in the process. I didn't really do a whole lot besides hit attack. I used some magic for fun, but ultimately leveling up and hitting attack is the way you're gonna get through this game. And we actually get a boss fight against... some swordsman. He literally does not get a turn before being blown away. In exchange for an ass beating, he gives us the blood sword, which has the hidden property of lifesteal and thus will remain practical for quite a while. Moving on to Tower the Second, which is this completely impossible structure. I grind for a bit for money to kit out the party because when in Ancient Roman, do as the Romans do. They were all about grinding, you should read a history book sometime. Another boss who wipes immediately, and we're done training our hearts and minds. Feels more like we simply increased our level, but we were overdue for some combat, I guess. So we head back to the sages and they give us our final trial, which is to fight them. Getting jumped by 3 shirtless bald men isn't my idea of a JRPG boss fight so much as Friday night in Northern England after the pub closes. Something I want to randomly point out at this juncture is that there are status effects in this game like paralysis, charm, and sleep, albeit they all do the same thing, which is to skip turns. But naturally, there is no UI element to tell whether either you or the enemy are affected by it, you just have to pay attention and see who's getting their turn skipped. Which is sort of annoying because utilizing disabling status elements is strong, but most spells have a random chance to work, so you won't immediately know if it panned out. Another strike against magic, I guess. We fight off the sages and ascend to the top to fight the Grand Sage, and... That's just a naked guy! This dude is protecting his modesty! He valiantly attempts to reply despite being literally caught with his pants down, but only manages to hit Farah. For 1 damage. 1. Then I kill an old man. I'm the hero! Our prize for this is the trial certificate to prove we did the thing we just did, or something. It barely matters because someone bursts in and tells us the minister urgently requests us back at the castle, which reveals this entire interlude to be nothing but an exercise in pissing around. Back in Heimrogue, I catch a glimpse of a very suspicious item in the store. The sleep axe. Leaving aside what the hell kind of axe makes you sleepy, it does exactly what you think it would do. It's an axe that when you hit the enemy, has a chance of making them fall asleep. Oh sorry, did I say a chance? That's technically true, I suppose. 100% is a chance. This axe is guaranteed to make the enemy fall asleep, which stops them from acting for 3 turns, and literally nothing in the entire game is immune to it, even bosses. If the boss is a single enemy, and a lot of them are, if Burke manages to land a single hit, the fight is over immediately. I would like to add at this point, Ancient Roman has no concept of random misses, so there's very few ways for this strategy to fall apart. It is absolutely as broken as it sounds, and it renders much of this game's combat completely moot here on down, if it wasn't already. Combat now ruined, we check in with the minister who sends us off on another errand to seek a mage to learn about the people becoming monsters disease, because remember when that was the primary objective of the game? I don't know, me neither. What the hell is going on in this game anymore? We go to a new village to meet a new mage with the rather normal name of Leon, who instantly acts like an asshole by getting offended if Kai asks that if he's the Leon they're looking for, claiming one should introduce oneself before asking for names, which is stupid and asinine and not how conversations work. You would obviously want to make sure you've got the right guy before you introduce yourself. Shut the fuck up, Leon, you asinine, misanthropic, pseudo-intellectual bull- Sorry. Lost my cool there for a moment. Leon tells us that elves may know more about the disease, but refuses to elaborate on where the elves are because he is an asshole. We seek the counsel of Subanov, the local carpenter instead, whose name sounds like I'm about to get hit with a Ligma joke. But he tells us the elves live in the forest, nothing groundbreaking there. Another forest kind of setting, and this one feigns like it's going to be more winding by hitting you with this fork in the road, but it's an illusion because it immediately loops in on itself. None of the areas in Ancient Roman individually manage to stretch beyond this limit, but it's amazing how it keeps tricking me into thinking it might try to be a little more ambitious, only to immediately course correct on me. We enter this tree, not even going to try to unpack the physical implications of this, and we can still get into fights in the tree, but the background has become a sprawling rock wasteland for some reason. An elf stands guard at the border between what is apparently elf territory, and this extremely confusing scene takes place.
あなた方がピクシーの仲間だとは存じませんでした。手当てをします。ついてきてください。
Firstly, what is even physically happening here? Farah getting stabbed, yes, but she just kind of lazily drifts into it. Secondly, why is this lady surprised that people die when they are killed? Thirdly, that is the flattest line delivery I have ever heard in a video game ever, let alone Japanese.
あなた方が
What on earth is this voice direction? I can only imagine what the recording sessions for this game looked like, with the madman who came up with this telling their unsuspecting actor, okay, but can you make it sound more like an alien who is trying to speak for the first time? It also turns out the elves live in the circus, but the only clown here is me because I'm still playing. Seriously, look at this, you just can't predict this game. This is supposed to be inside of a tree. This place is literally called Elfland, according to Mrs. Elf herself. Say that 3 times fast. Is this a theme park? Can I ride the elf coaster? No, but we do get Elf as a party member. Her name is Mina, and the elf elder, the elfder, if you will, basically gives her to us as apology for her stabbing our pixie. She didn't die, but she is out of the party forever now, and Michelle is hopeless, so obviously someone had to fill the space. Farah does also in fact do the thing where anything equipped to her is gone forever, and now you see the real reason her equipment is almost all unique. I did lose a couple of accessories to this though, so I'm still grumpy. Incredibly, the Elfter also says he knows nothing about the monster disease, and this is actually the first time he's even heard of it, so we once again have bumbled around on a completely pointless dead end. Are you noticing a pattern yet? We stopped by the general store but Elven on the way out. That really is what it's called. I've not been drawing a lot of attention to this, but all the store names are in fact unique, and they get progressively dumber as the game goes on in direct relation to the plot's ability to hang on to its own momentum. It's not really picking up any either, since our next lead is found by reporting back to the castle and getting a more blatant errand to find some cool equipment on a faraway island, and the game doesn't even finish that thought before asking us to instead check up on another town destroyed by monsters. How is it this unfocused? This story doesn't just need an editing pass, it needs medication. This is worrying levels of scatterbrain. At this juncture, I'd like to take a step back, because while I have been dunking on the game pretty hard, and just look at it, how could you not? I do want to be clear that I'm not mad at Ancient Roman. Something that's very fascinating about it is that while it is a complete mess in just about every possible aspect, it's rarely actively frustrating or overly tedious. Sometimes the too frequent random encounters can be tiring, but this is hardly uncommon even amongst the system's best offerings. Battles rarely last more than a few turns due to the ridiculous way damage scales, meaning almost all fights will end in a complete blowout in one direction or the other, but it at least means they're relatively brisk. Ancient Roman, despite all its many flaws, is extremely entertaining. It's this quality that I think has earned it its fandom on the Japanese side of the internet. It's a true rare specimen of a game that isn't failing due to having novel ideas that it can't fully realize like some other bad games I've covered on this channel. Nor is it bad due to being too one-note and not having enough content. It's trying some extremely traditional, well-explored ideas, but bungling the basic execution in ways you would never even think possible. And yet somehow it manages this without ever becoming a slog. Despite all of the shit talk I have and will continue to do, I had a good time with Ancient Roman, and I do absolutely recommend you try it yourself, especially if you can get a group viewing going. Bad games are more fun with friends, after all. This property fascinates me because if I had fun with it, is it really fair to call it bad? I mean, yes, obviously, look at what I'm dealing with here. But I have had less fun with better games than Ancient Roman, and I'm not really sure what to make of that. There's just something intoxicating about it. It fails so completely, so absolutely thoroughly that it accidentally becomes cohesive and can genuinely be enjoyed as just a silly comedy romp. Many games are bad. Few are so bad that they loop back around to enthralling. Ancient Roman is absolutely such a game. It's terrible, and I have almost nothing to say in its defense, but I like it. I really do. I like it in a way I generally haven't for some of the other bad games I've covered on this channel, and I'm not even able to put an exact finger on why. What does it truly mean for a game to be bad? Well, forget the philosophical waxing for a moment, because we have a new party member all of a sudden. Checking in on that destroyed town prompts us to indeed find it destroyed, with a lone survivor in the wreckage, MacLeod. This is actually the guard captain from much earlier in the game. We spoke to him once. He's only going to be in the party for a brief time, being another temporary addition, which is a shame because he has my favourite voice line for when you decline to buy things at a shop. Nazeda! Such raw emotion for something so banal. He's got a pretty good stat line, seemingly to balance out the fact he joins with no equipment, something all new roster additions do. We attempt to clean up the village of the monsters remaining by fighting a boss at the top of a building, who, true to Ancient Roman's damage scaling, manages to deal a whole 1 point of damage before getting punted, saving an injured female knight in the process. This is Serena, and she also joins the party on the spot at this point, and unlike Fox MacLeod, she's hanging around for the long term. Serena's main merit as a party member is her incredible speed, allowing her to act first most of the time. If it seems like the game is progressing rather rapidly at this stage, having gained 3 new party members in the past roughly hour or so of gameplay, that's because it is. Ancient Roman's pacing is very peculiar, where the early game feels very ponderous, while the mid to late game feels breakneck.
Ha ha ha! Yes! You guys are amazing! But you still need to pay!
We can buy milk if we want. It's the only thing you can buy here. Before we can leave, MacLeod sidetracks us with an errand to check out Old Heinroad Castle, saying, "I think the minister would like us to check it out." Put a pin in that, I'm going to complain about it later. So we're off to explore an evil castle. That's a weird-looking dog. Money payouts for fights here undergoes an abrupt spike, giving roughly 1,000 per encounter, so if you want to finally start buying all the items you've been seeing all game but couldn't afford, now's your first real opportunity to make a dent in that, but it's still better to hold off for now. These are kitsune according to the game, and man, I'll take your word for it, that's a creative interpretation. Reaching the boss in no time, since despite being a castle and thus prime real estate for an actual dungeon, once again this entire area is only about 4 screens. It loops in on itself though, it's a circle. That's almost level design. But really, what a blur. No really, there he is. He's the boss of this area. And now he's dead. Jesus Christ. The most elegant way to introduce character relationships. Just have them yell father right before they die. Classic stuff. I promise you I'm not getting lazy while editing this, I'm not skipping stuff, the game really is just paced like that. Kai leaves everyone to their business of staring at the guy they just killed to poke around a side room and... oh my god! It's the room from Kai's dream at the start of the game, it's all coming together! Kai finally realizes the truth. That his mother died trying to protect him and that his resenting of her was for nothing. The group gives him a little pep talk and it's a warm moment of sincerity from the cast. Let's enjoy it for a moment. Except no,
What the fuck are you talking about?
no part of this makes any goddamn sense. Kai claims to barely remember his mother having lived under monster rule for most of his life, so it makes absolutely no sense that he'd resent her specifically, something that, by the way, has only been mentioned exactly now. Kai's resentment of his mother has never come up prior. Kai talks about the dreams he has of being taken away from his mother by monsters over the course of the game a couple of times, during which he never seems especially upset. If anything, it seems like he assumes these visions are simply fact and takes them on face value, which is stupid, but because it's ancient Roman, this is completely correct. Secondly, Kai getting kidnapped by monsters happened 17 years ago, according to the game's intro. His mother's corpse has just been sitting there for 17 years and has remained recognizable? Why does Kai even assume this corpse is his mother? How would he know that? He claims to barely remember her. Thirdly, there's no particular reason to even think his mother died as a result of the kidnapping. This is relatively minor, I guess we can just infer the monsters finished the job, but she seems very much alive after this altercation based on what the game itself shows. This is all treated like a real character growth moment for Kai, but it's not even vaguely coherent. This game makes me feel like I'm going insane. Stop doing your power of friendship routine and answer my questions! Back to the castle. Whatever. Moving on. Reporting back in with the minister, and he's actively surprised we went poking around the old castle. Remember when I said I was going to complain about this later? Well, here it is. Turns out McLeod's intuition that the minister wanted us to go there was completely wrong. He didn't really care. Why? Was this game written by two people trying to spite each other? Discarding that entirely, our boat's ready. You know, the boat to go seek the equipment on the island. Did you forget? It's okay if you forgot, because Burke did too. But none of our party knows how to sail a boat, so we gotta make like Ryo Hazuki and look for some sailors. I wonder which sailor is important. Is it the two models that have been repeated across countless NPCs, or is it the brand new one? I wonder. We need to stay the night at the inn to advance the plot, and I'm actually too broke to afford this, but the game surprisingly has the consideration to bail me out by making this particular stay free as part of the story. Ancient Roman is such a bizarre mess of a game that when it actually shows just about enough consideration of the player's time like this, it really throws me off. The next morning, we meet with our new ship captain, who just agrees on the spot to go on the journey, introduces himself as Baroa, and we're off to the high seas just like that. He joins the party. I guess I'm glad the game's moving along now after so much faffing about, but it's weird that the things that seem like they would benefit from some build-up happen with relatively little ceremony. We hop on the boat, and Disc 2. That's right, Ancient Roman is a 2-disc game. Even shitty FMVs take up a lot of storage space, you know. Now, when a normal video game needs to use multiple discs, typically you have the option to save the game, and then you pop open the tray, stick the second disc in, the disc starts spinning, and the game continues where it left off. This process is so banal, some of you are probably wondering why I'm even describing it. Well, Ancient Roman is not a normal video game, and it forces you to save the game at this juncture. If you decline to save, it'll simply tell you that if you don't, the game can't continue and loop back around until you do. The reason for this is that Ancient Roman is unable to simply continue the game normally after swapping the disc in the middle of gameplay. You need to reset the entire console and load your Disc 2 save file to make it work. I have never ever seen a PS1 game where the disc swapping works like this. And it comes with the obvious side effect that if you have no memory card or insufficient space, it is impossible to progress onto the second disc. I don't know why it has to do this, but it's very funny to watch a game stumble over technical hurdles every other game have cleared with no problem. I'm surprised this didn't cause the game to fail certification. Sony's standards circa the PS1 must have been way lower. Usually they bounce games for not calling it the official DualSense PlayStation official real controller, whatever stupid brand compliance bollocks in system text, but they allowed this? Sorry, my bitterness is showing. Anyway, swap to Disc 2, sail to the sealed cave. It's a little odd because the excuse for it being difficult to find sailors in the first place is supposedly the seas being dangerous and full of monsters, but this game has no random encounters on the world map since it's basically a fancy menu. The background on this isle is perhaps the rawest in the entire game. This is somehow the grainiest photo of the most featureless landscape that doesn't even look like the location we're in. Deeper into the island, we see a woman trying to open what I am told is a door. I'll take their word for it. She can't and she blinks out of existence. But we can. Now, at this point you may be starting to get a bit sick of the random encounter rate. This is the typical point of a JRPG where that starts to wear on you in my experience. If so, fortunately there is a perfect countermeasure you can take. Locate the circle button upon your PlayStation controller. Press it, and that's it. As long as you hold the circle button down, random encounters simply will not happen. There is no known reason for this. Is it a debug feature that was left in? Is it just another bug? I could be convinced of either, but it really is that simple. You need to be careful not to do this too much lest you underlevel yourself, but since this game isn't actually too hard overall, you can abuse it more than you'd think. Inside the decidedly now very unsealed cave, we find a room that speaks to us, it's not really clear what's happening here, and tells us the god weapons are here, and only those with divine power may wield them. So that's our new objective. Forget everything that was going on, we are now trying to obtain divine power. Well, that was pointless, remarks Serena. Thanks, the feeling is mutual. On a different island accessible to us, we explore some rooms, and the crudest sound effect replaced by text yet surfaces as Burke prods and punches a staff to open a hidden passage, and the game explains, in parenthesis, what the sound effects are supposed to be. Mistakes indeed do happen. Nothing really comes of this yet because I'm too early, which is one of the rare instances of being allowed to visit somewhere in this game before you can actually do anything meaningful. Abridging a few scenes of badgering people about divine power, we eventually route to a new island, Hermit Island, which fittingly only has one person on it. We ask him point blank about divine power, and the Hermit has the very salient if pretty stock question of what the group wants with such incredible power. The group, incredibly, has absolutely no good answer to this question. It's hysterical. It's like the game is growing self-awareness. It's a pretty simple question and they just don't have a good answer. They don't have a good reason to be seeking this. They just kinda want some cool doodads. The Hermit seems to give up, perhaps realizing the group is too stupid to engage in philosophy with, and just tells them the books about divine power are stored in a nearby cave. Now I, foolishly, thought that this would be a lead up to some kind of dungeon where we needed to find an underground library or something. So please, feast your eyes on the tomes of divine power. Come on, dude! I keep getting owned by this game, man. I don't know why this shot, of all things, is what made me completely lose my mind, but it was. Just this bare-ass bookshelf smack in a completely nondescript cave as the location of wisdom that leads to ultimate power is just... I just can't, man. This is ridiculous. It's so half-assed for something that seems like it would be given some sort of ceremony. I do not have the tomes you seek. They are stored in the ancient caves. And I thought it was going to be like, a cave dungeon. I thought it was going to be like a cave dungeon where, you'd go through and you'd find, like, an ancient library or something under the ground. No, it's a fucking wooden bookcase in a cave, like a little... God. Everyone reads for a bit, and each party member learns of a god and their location. One per party member, and you better take notes when they're explaining this because they will not tell you twice. This is where the game sort of opens up. You have 5 leads to pursue, and the game doesn't prescribe much of an order to you here, although it's not completely non-linear. Some of these, unbeknownst to you, can't be done until the other ones are completed. So the current quest for godly power follows a fairly similar flow for every individual god, and actually encompasses most of the second disc of this game, but despite this, not a lot actually happens, so I'm gonna rattle through these relatively quickly. Check out this chocolate structure the first god is in. These all take the form of solo fights against a character's respective god, which you might think could be a cause for concern if you haven't been using a character for a while. But Ancient Roman again shows that slightly odd consideration for the player by actually featuring permanent experience sharing across all members of the party, so there's a low chance these fights slow you down much. Winning the fight grants that character the power of their god, which doesn't actually do anything in practical terms. I have reason to suspect being able to transform into a character's god was a cut feature, based on how transform is visible in the battle menu in that pre-release demo I mentioned a while back. But in the final game, it is not there, and having divine power means nothing. On the way out of this first shrine, we learn the name Gizafiel, the apparent true identity of the one threatening the world. This has been brought up for the very first time at exactly this moment, so now the story has completely shifted from whatever the hell was happening before to, let's get buff and kill a demon. Everything prior, the people becoming monsters disease and whatever other threads the game was juggling, all completely dropped at this juncture. Forget about them. The game has finally decided it needs to figure out how to get to an ending. Michelia continues to be treated just so unkindly by the game, she's not even blessed with a unique fight for her god, you just have to find the shrine. This opens up the way to the next shrine, so Baroa gets his divine power in turn. It's the 4th shrine where something truly, completely insane takes place. The shrine needs a specific sword to access, and we can't get to where it is without breaking this dam. But doing so would cause a village downstream to be completely destroyed and all of its inhabitants killed. Inexplicably, they declare that they don't have time to evacuate everyone, and there's no time to spare. Mina then tells a story of a fruit that when ingested gives you the power to breathe underwater. Convenient, but okay, let's eat the fruit and swim through the dam. That makes some sense. Wait, no, what do you mean you're still going to break the dam? Kai, no, it doesn't matter if they can breathe underwater or not, you're going to send a tsunami at this place. What on earth are you talking about? Did this game's writers not know how floods work? Being able to breathe isn't not a concern, but it's relatively secondary compared to the immediate issue of tons of water smacking into everything at hundreds of kilometers per hour. We don't have time to evacuate these people, but we do have time to run over to this fucking tree to get a magic fruit? Why can't we eat the fruit and just swim through the dam ourselves? How is this your plan? What is wrong with these people? It's not even an interesting interlude gameplay-wise, because the tree is one screen you select on the map. What is the point of any of this? And this stupid plan totally does work. Baroa breaks the dam, Serena grabs the sword, and the town is in fact unharmed, despite having had a lake dumped through it. Stupid ass game. Nevertheless, we wrap up getting everyone's god powers. Nothing quite so insane happens over the rest of these. Once you have a god power, you can backtrack to that cave on the sealed island and get everyone's ultimate weapons. Everyone except Kai, because somewhat obnoxiously, despite being the protagonist, Kai's ultimate weapon is missable unless you know to go poking around before completing everyone else's powers, and you better believe I missed it. This actually now makes Kai substantially weaker than the rest of the party, and I drop him from the lineup because despite being the protagonist, there is no requirement for him to be in the active team. Despite him getting his power lost and turning into Golden Kai. This guy sucks now. We are then sent on yet another ridiculous out-of-the-blue errand because for some reason the sage thinks the next logical course of action is to go to the underworld to check on Kai's father's soul? It is absolutely not clear why this is relevant information, but as Burke puts it, we've got a plan, let's go to hell. This seems to be an excuse to get you to do one last bit of dicking about before the finale, since you need to find 2 keys to get into hell, which is just a pair of caves, really. So we do that, reach hell, and get this cutscene where Kai meets his mother instead, who asks him to save his father, meaning he's not dead. No soul in hell, not dead. Makes perfect sense to me. At this point, the money gained from encounters rockets through the roof as we approach the endgame, and I presume they wanted it to be easier to get all the expensive gear. Our new final goal is essentially to go to 2 places, break a magic seal which opens a 3rd place where we can then fight the final boss. In one of such places, I run across this room where the developers appear to have forgotten to apply the transparency to the background, leaving the chroma key clearly visible. After grabbing some item we need from this place, Mina fights a sudden solo fight against another elf possessed by darkness, and the game tries to do a sad moment with Mina killing one of her own, but this character was literally just introduced now, and their dying words only serve to provide instructions on where to go next. We discover a new village occupied entirely by non-hostile monsters. Remember that people becoming monsters disease? Well, the game also did, briefly, long enough to add this area. Even though it complicates the story somewhat by implying that some of the people who turn into monsters don't lose their humanity, a concept never previously alluded to, and the game doesn't do anything interesting with it. This place has a vendor called the King of Pervs, who sells bloomers, sailor outfits, and school swimsuits, equipment that can only be used by your female party members, because whatever, consistency of setting hasn't been this game's strong suit anyway. Gearing up to visit a handful of towers that house bosses in the form of Gizafiel's lackeys, because apparently the ultimate demon lord has minions who serve him, and this was maybe very briefly alluded to at like the very start of the game, but they forgot to bring it up over the past 15 or so hours. The second of these lackeys, Ramias, has some kind of pet with him in his fight named Gary, and killing it felt really mean-spirited. What did Gary do to me? Sorry, man. Defeating all of these grants us access to the final area, a sealed-off castle, where we quickly find Gizafiel. Remember, this is still ancient Roman and the individual areas are still only about 3 screens long.
Also, hi, Editing Punchy here. I didn't even realize this until making the video, but this is just the exact same level as Old Heinroad Castle. They just reused it and made it slightly darker. What the hell? This is supposed to be the final level, guys.
And what ensues is an extremely weird exchange, where Gizafiel gets on that whole humanity is irredeemable, our sins are too deep, etc, etc. You've heard all this before if you've played a JRPG. But the party is entirely too stupid to comprehend his thrust and instead just generally supports Kai as the good king who will guide humanity with his noble virtue, which wasn't even close to what the villain was talking about. It's really bizarre. The game keeps trying to do the usual JRPG shtick, but it has a cast of characters that are too stupid to really engage with it properly. It's like one of those really shitty fantasy isekai light novels, but it comes from a time before that was really a mainstream genre. Gizafiel, like many before him, gives up on trying to talk to the party, and we end up fighting him and a lackey. At this point I notice we are quite susceptible to the magic attacks of Gizafield. Bert gets exploded in one hit. I still pull through because the damage in this game is absurd. It's a very kill instantly or be killed instantly sort of game. The lackey turns out to be Kai's dad, who then also dies on the spot. Can you believe it's done this 3 times now? Suddenly introduce a character who dies in the very same scene? We're now at the true point of no return. Entering this door sends us to the Gigas dimension, so you know it's final boss time. The first phase is a 3v3 against Gizafel and his 2 main lackeys, and this fight is by far the most dangerous fight in the game and the only one that posed any real challenge to me during the playthrough. In fact, I lost this fight twice because their magic would pop my entire team for a significant chunk of my health every time, and competing with that DPS was tricky. This being the only fight in the entire playthrough that I lost, forcing me to think, is not what I expected, but I ended up discovering the main reason this fight is such an abrupt difficulty spike is, if you can believe it, because of a bug. No really, I'm not just blaming the game for losing. Remember when I explained the stats? Well, here's the problem. Magic attack and magic defense? They're bugged. The corresponding stats are actually flipped. This means characters that have a low IQ because they're intended to be bad spellcasters are actually massively susceptible to magic damage. This also has the side effect of blessing Mina, who's meant to have a very high MG, meaning magic defense, with massive spell damage instead. Unfortunately, since offensive magic is generally bad, this isn't of much use to us here. You can cast a spell to increase magic defense, but it seems to be bugged in a similar way and doesn't actually help, presumably because it also targets the wrong stat. Fortunately, you can just buy stat-increasing items, and money game is through the roof at this point, so by dropping all of my cash on items to increase my speed and damage, I just kind of power through on the 3rd attempt without applying any sort of strategy. Really, I just got lucky. Burke and Baroa both crit on their first moves, instantly knocking the main damage dealer out of the fight, and I mostly cruise my way through the rest of it. Gizafield then ascends to his final form by absorbing his lackeys, and Farah's back to drop us a free full heal before the final boss. This is a 3v1 fight and as a result is much easier. If you equip that sleep axe on Burke, then you win on the spot with no effort, since not even the final boss is immune to this. All he did was physically attack for pitiful damage and got sent packing. Smash cut back to Kai having taken up the crown and him having gotten married to Michelia, which might seem like it comes out of nowhere given that Kai doesn't seem to be particularly into her, because it did for me. There's apparently a bunch of optional romance events that make this a bit more of a natural development, but I managed to miss all of them, so oops. And that's it. That's Ancient Roman. As a final epitaph to this extremely shit game, the credits don't even have unique music, instead reusing one of the random field themes. Half-assed, all the way to the end. The credits reveal the insane fact this game had 8 graphic designers and 6 people involved in world design. Doing what? How on earth did it take 6 people to write something like this? Naturally, Ancient Roman has nothing like a New Game Plus mode or a post-game. Such things weren't that common in PS1 RPGs of the time, so that's really it. That's Ancient Roman. Absolutely the worst PS1 RPG I have ever played that I nevertheless kind of enjoyed. It's 0 out of 10, but it's also 10 out of 10. It fails so astoundingly thoroughly in everything it attempts that it becomes engrossing because of how completely unpredictable it is in its attempts to replicate classic RPGs. There are very few games I think I could conceivably call the worst of a console without it being hyperbole, but Ancient Roman puts up a really convincing case for itself. If you can think of any other absolute PS1 stinkers, I'd honestly love to hear them, because how much lower can the bar possibly go from here? I feel like I've climbed the Mount Everest of shit, and now I desperately need to take a shower. That's a gross analog. I'm gonna go now. Thanks for watching. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the very worst the PlayStation 1 has to offer. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, and if you want to join these fine people in the credits, consider supporting me on the Patreon. There's an exclusive video up there where I explore the pre-release demo of Ancient Roman in greater detail, you know, for those who just couldn't get enough of this incredible game. This video ended up being one of those classic YouTuber moments where in my head it was supposed to be about 40 minutes long tops, and then it ended up being nearly double that, as you can see, so whoops. I think next time I really will try to attempt to cover a game that won't take me 3 months to produce a video about, and I hope to see you there. Catch you next time.